All right, so what do we have so far as some potential possibilities here with Gregor's job, traveling salesman? What's that kind of helping us represent? Tyler, get us started. Some things number one. Okay. So limits human interaction. Absolutely going to be accurate. Like a little yellow guy in overalls?
What?
Minion. Little yellow guy. I think last year we had a Minion Halloween trick-or-treater in the household. Replaceable? Yeah. In the sense that anyone could do that job. And certainly, like a person who would be the boss comes in and basically is saying that he's going to have to get fired at some point if things don't change very quickly. So it's not that they're doing whatever they can to try to get him to work when he has this transformation as a bug. So yeah, the idea it's going to be limiting human interaction because he's always away from home and you have irregular schedules that he's kind of talking about all the time. Treated like a minion or a bug. You have that quote coming there from page 6, like with a being without any kind of backbone. And so this certainly becomes appropriate since you have that overall metamorphosis change into a bug. Speaking of which, then Zach, we'll get to you. It's not listed on the page because these are not all the potential symbols that would be within the book, within the novella. What is really the primary symbol that does happen though? Him turning into a bug. So when you write for the essay, you could include part of your symbolism the fact that he turns into a bug. It's not that you're limited solely to what's on this page, but this is something that could certainly kind of get you started. In the sense that he feels like he's kind of like becoming a hermit, you mean? Yeah, I think so. And at the top of the page, and we didn't go into this yesterday because I wanted to make sure you were focusing on the whole aspect of symbolism. But you had two definitions up here. We have symbolism where you have an object, or it could be a person, place, whatever, that's going to stand for what it is, but also something else. If your whole story has an extra meaning to it, if the whole story ends up being symbolic, really becomes allegorical. And, one of the things that we kind of touched upon is Gregor, or Franz Kafka, as a person, feels isolated, feels alienated, has poor connections, relations with his family, doesn't really feel like he has a job that he can be successful with. He, as an individual, as a writer, feels alienated, feels isolated. He's Jewish, and no, it's not time for the Holocaust, happening, but there's certainly persecution that's still occurring because of that, where you could feel different from everyone else. So that overall symbolical idea of, kind of being a hermit or being someone who doesn't kind of fit in would certainly work throughout the whole story as a whole. But certainly this is going to kind of, highlight that type of feeling of separation. So if you're looking at your blank theme sheet that you just picked up today, which one of those themes, and it could be multiple, but which one or ones of those themes would it seem like his job as a traveling salesman could best align with? Especially if we're going lack of human interaction and all those kinds of things. Yeah, I would, kind of depending upon which detail you want to go with, I'd say certainly that whole alienation or isolation would be one. So on this blank sheet, I'm writing down an example, possible symbol that I might look at is going to be his job as a traveling salesman. I'm also going to write next to it a Roman numeral number 1 so that I realize, I know that I'm dealing with part 1 of the story. Because I'm going to have examples coming from part 1, part 2, part 3. I want to be able to keep track of that. You said him being a minion. which we just kind of talked about being a bug, that's where I would think, Gia, you just said dehumanization would start to take place because he doesn't feel like a human anymore, or doesn't even feel like he's being treated as a human anymore. So certainly that dehumanization aspect would be able to kind of come across. So down here at the bottom where it has dehumanization, you could go simply with the transformation into a bug, which that big description is going to be happening, certainly within part 1. But you also could go with his overall job, where he's getting treated like a minion. That could be a quote that would kind of explain that there's going to be some dehumanization as well. So job as a salesman, being treated like a minion on page 6 could certainly deal with that dehumanization. Also, we got coming there from part 1. So again, we're trying to give you some ammunition to work with when it comes to the essay, so you don't have to kind of sit and think about, all right, what can I do for a symbol, what can I do for a theme? You already got a whole bunch that are going to be ready to go. How about number 2, magazine cutout of Lady in Fur? That one. And even then, the word true could kind of be, kind of limited because he doesn't even, like as you said, doesn't even know her, but at least seems to be, and when we say symbolism, a word that we use a lot is going to be representative, but, at least kind of represents, if not any kind of human contact, he has a what for human contact or interaction? Represents his hope, his desire, yes. Something along those lines. So represents his desire or need
to have that bond or like connection with somebody, anybody, maybe preferably the woman.
And I mean, think of what you have in your room. Okay, not that you have pictures of yourself. Maybe you do. You probably have some. Whether it be pictures of yourself or family members or whatever, friends, but you have pictures of at least things that mean something to you in your room. The only here, hold on. We'll get to you. The only thing that ever gets mentioned is this cutout, and the reason that page 13 gets mentioned on here. What has he done to the cutout of the photo?
He framed it.
He has, and not only did he frame it, but it's his own frame that is on there. So you know that there's going to be some special, meaning relation to it in the sense that he builds his own frame for it. Older daughter has a couple posters of Taylor Swift. I would like to burn them, but I won't. Well, she just got on for her birthday like 2 weeks ago, so I got to let them stay up there for a little bit. And so she has them framed, the big posters and all that kind of stuff. She has never met Taylor Swift. She hasn't gone to a concert yet for Taylor Swift. And she probably is never going to meet Taylor Swift. But people can at least recognize that that's a well-known person, that's a celebrity, that's someone that individuals can look up to. That could be someone that some individuals dislike. But it's understandable that there can be posters of celebrities, athletes, things like that in your room. But to have a picture of a woman that no one knows, that there's no connection to whatsoever, that's certainly something that's going to kind of highlight that lack of human interaction that he, so desperately desires.
Like the most admirable things that I remember is my mom frames whenever I put this up. I put up like on my door, like coming up into my room, because like my room is on like the top floor of the house. So I have a Tupac Shakur poster with him like holding rosaries, and then I have a Cardi B poster. So like I have them like all in like the good positions.
Come March and April, you'll do your little presentation as will everyone else about what's in your room and what would you want to be in your room to represent yourself. So you'll be able to get into that stuff. So when it comes into, again, those themes, if we're looking for, something that it's probably going to match up with, if you don't have that interaction, if you don't have that connection with someone, you probably have a feeling of alienation or isolation. So the magazine cutout would be a pretty good example that you could put there under alienation or isolation. And it can end up certainly being up to you. We kind of talked about a difference between the two. I would say isolation tends to be something that's a little bit more self-imposed, whereas alienation is you are being forced away from people. So should you decide to go with this theme, I would pick one of those two terms, which you think is going to work best for that argument that you're going to be working with. For the magazine cutout? Yeah, I think so. What's your thought process for putting it over here? And then I'll tell you mine. Yeah, I would think that's accurate. And I certainly don't mean this to sound like, I'm saying this because we got a bunch of 10th graders in this room. But honestly, 9th and 10th grade, I think post-middle school is when friends change a lot. People you're friends with in 7th and 8th grade could be completely different come 9th and 10th grade. And who you're friends with in 10th grade could be different than 11th grade. We're friends now. No. But, who you associate yourself with is part of how you identify yourself. So if you have that struggle for a connection with somebody, part of the reason, not a guarantee, but it could be maybe not understanding who I want to be yet at this point, or who I think I'm going to be. And that same thing with that transformation into a bug. Struggle for personal identity. What's going to really highlight that you're having a hard time coming up with a human identity? Well, I'm going to change into a bug, a being, or something along those lines. A being. Or a bee. A being would also constitute probably a struggle for identity.
Yeah, how would you remove?
Well, the giant picks you up for the Jack and the Beanstalk aid, and the giant gets you up, and then you grow in the ground. Descend upwards. Alarm clock. This is one a lot of times where people look at it and go, yeah, I don't know. Alarm clock. This better work if you're going to, I gotta do it. Okay.
So, like, him sleeping is almost a way to escape from reality. Well, not reality, but like him being treated like a bug, and that alarm clock's like a reminder he has to go back to being like.
I request the same.
So, clock reminds him of reality. Okay. Essentially puts an end to the quote-unquote dream. And especially what would kind of highlight that is what's the reality that he doesn't want to face? I mean, this is usually why your alarm goes off. You got to go to school, or you have to go in 10 years or 5 years or a couple of years going to work, things like that. So there's something that he's not necessarily looking forward to, that's the reality, that this is going to be the indicator that you got to come back to it. And certainly, and then Zach will get to you, that reality is something that's very structured. You got to be on this train. You got to get here at this time. You have to be there at certain points. If you deviate from that time, from that structure, from that expectation that other people have of you, then we're going to come knocking on your 3 doors and find out why you're still sleeping or you haven't gotten up yet.
They said like this, like on the page, I think it was page 3, they said like the talk was like taken away, and how like maybe like it's taken away to like before they can realize it.
So time is ticking away, and really as you take a look at whether it be page 3 or even like when it's 3 a.m. on page 71, when he has his last breath, time is ticking away. Really, time is running, out. There's only so much time that you have, and that transformation is kind of part of that. You're not going to be human all that much longer. You might not be on this earth all that much longer. So certainly, yeah, those things with the clock could work. Did you have another one? Nope. So when it comes to themes over here, Austin, since you kind of got us started, any ones that you were feeling more so for?
I said kind
And you're allowed to say, I'm not sure.
yeah, I'm not really sure.
I would say part of it would go, I think you could go roles and expectations for society, that there's like a structure. There's an expected structure to follow. And again, one here meaning part one. You said dehumanization? And certainly, if you're going with that time is running out, as to him being a human being, to him, or not even just being a human being, but him kind of being quote unquote himself, I think that's where you could certainly look at with the dehumanization aspect. Here's something that is significantly different about this writing assignment, this essay, compared to the one we did for Oedipus Rex. It doesn't mean it's easier or harder. There's going to be more emphasis on you, though, explaining yourself. Because the thing with symbolism is you can go, okay, this is what the clock represents, but you have to make sure you explain why. And so as opposed to, well, here's foreshadowing, here's irony, here's figurative language, which is a little bit more cut and dry, symbolism is going to require a little bit more explanation on our part as to, well, this is why I think it's going to have that connection. The nice thing is it gives you a lot of flexibility and freedom to do some different things. I think key and locked doors people are doing pretty well with, coming up with some ideas. Nick, what do you have for this one? For number 4? Okay. So Gregor separates himself from the family. And something that would certainly drive that point home, not counting him, how many members does he have in his family? Mom, dad, sister, 3. You got 3 family members. You also happen to have 3 doors. All of those things are locked. So certainly the significance, the importance of 3 within the family and then also within the doors is going to kind of highlight that. The key, he has a heck of a time trying to turn it. So you could argue he has a heck of a time trying to let people into his life if he wants. And even when the doors are open later on in parts 2 and 3, it's still kind of that boundary. It's still that separation that exists. Sounds like what theme? Sounds a lot like isolation, yeah. Now, can Zach write about him being a traveling salesman, the magazine cutout, and the doors, all for alienation in his essay? Probably not, because he's going to be choosing one aspect from part 1, one aspect from part 2, one from part 3. So it's deciding which one you ultimately are going to want to go with the most. Yep.
Is one thing from each section for all of these categories?
By categories meaning theme?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
you're just picking one theme. So you go alienation, which is fine. Nick could go like struggle for personal identity. That's fine. That's the only one that you're looking at.
All right.
Otherwise, this turns into a mammoth assignment that we don't need to focus on that one today. And which one you choose is entirely up to you. Also, understand there could be some things where you might make reference to, like, the window here for number 5. The window gets mentioned on page 38. It gets mentioned at a couple different points. So Ben could end up using the window in theory for part 1. You could end up using it for part 2 and still be okay. It's not that you're held just to page 38, just to page 3, for when those things first appear. That's the nice thing about something like him transforming into a bug. At what part is he transformed into a bug? 1, 2, 3. So where you need to kind of match some things in, you can certainly work with it. We talked about separation between him and his family. How about windows so far as separation? Any ideas with separation there, Ben?
I thought that as a barrier from his human life to what his life's gonna be now.
Okay.
As a
So if we kind of go with separation between, I'm going to put like his world and the outside world. kind of have, his world is him as being a bug. The outside world is going to be something that's going to be more of a human form. It's going to be a barrier. You could also kind of go with what's the outside world, since people are humans and we're walking around and we're doing real things. Or are we? A little more of like reality. What's his world? Potentially more of like kind of like a dream, world that it's in. So it's a little bit of that barrier. Zach, you had something?
Like, this would then kind of be like if he was going to do his kind of future, they say like he doesn't like want to live with his like parents that long, like Susie stays and all that, head off, then he's gonna try to like become a writer.
It kind of gets to where he would want to be, as opposed to where he's kind of stuck.
Like this is like the only way out if he can wants
Which
to go back to the
Which the scary thing about that would be, if you're in a situation where you're stuck and there's a situation where you want to be and you can catch just a glimpse of it, boy, I want to go back to middle school. No one wants to go back to middle school. Look at the middle school over there. I can see it. There's the windows. Almost reach it, but I can't quite get there.
Nope, not there.
That's why we put you there. Because you're getting those days. Now we're in our new world. Then if you can see it, but you can't quite get there because there is that barrier, that separation, that's going to make it all the more agonizing, that you can't get to it. And certainly, yeah, the idea that he would want to be something beyond just being stuck with the family, I think would be a good thing. We see, or I see, Hayden can't. You see what, the rotunda, when you look through.
Something that could actually happen. Pajama day. Isn't that good?
I like pajama day. Actually, I like pajama day.
Yes.
We get a wish from our principal.
Just so you know, Mrs. Trainer, if you don't know Mrs. Trainer, this is Mrs. Trainer. Mrs. Trainer brought in snacks for fourth period, for my fourth period. What did you get, Zach? Nothing. So maybe. Which, if she does, I helped you. You're welcome. Hayden sees rotunda. I see school. What's he see? No, but what's he see through the window? What does Gregor see through the window? Nothing. No food. Hospital. So, grab your snack. Thank you, Mr. Kane. You're welcome, children. And then you say, thank you, Mrs. Trainer. It's because she's an English. Oh, if only that were our bell to leave, it would be like the perfect ending. But it's not. Go back.
So bad.
But you're still here in reality.
Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Trainer. I went Cheeto Puffs, so those. That's okay. Which is good, because I don't want them touching their theme sheets and getting little...
Well, you got to.
I got it. See, the reason I said this was so that I could finish eating mine in front of you. What do we associate with a hospital?
Health.
Okay. You say help or health? I'll just write both. So with a hospital, help, health, human, and of course as he's becoming less and less human, what happens when he looks out the window when you see the hospital? It's getting blurrier, it's getting grayer, it's getting harder to see, it's kind of disappearing. So his connection to the hospital, which we've taken care of down here anyway, that chance of him being human or to live the life that he wants continues to get slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. What's the nice thing about this example, since it's coming from page 38, we are now in part number 2. So where you have a lot of part 1s all throughout your theme sheet, now we can start to put in some things for part 2. I'd say alienation, certainly with the window. You could have here in part 2. The lack of help or health with his dehumanization could certainly be a main part that you look at as 2. Here with the window coming from part 2. Window, and even kind of right hospital next to it, I think would be a good move.
It's cheesy, but couldn't the whole hospital thing go under like the personal identity almost? Because like it's him like losing like health to get back to like human.
Feeling less human. Yeah. So you're and you could go, well, isn't that kind of like the same thing as dehumanization? But if you end up doing your whole essay where you're doing struggle for identity, it's not like you have to even worry about saying it's going to cross over to dehumanization because you're not writing about 2 different themes. So yeah, we'll just put window / hospital. Part number 2. How about uniform? Aiden?
I said for the uniform importance, maybe Gregor's father's dignity and Gregor's feelings for his father.
Okay. And I put, 2 page numbers here on 20 and 50, but it could certainly go in a lot of directions where this could be, because 20 is going to be part 1, 50 is going to be part 2. You still have reference to the father's uniform with the banker uniform in part 3. So really, you could be getting it from a variety of different places. So dignity was the key word that you went with? So there we go. Sense of dignity. And just a quick little reminder, the uniform for Gregor's father, this is going to be, the ones with the polished buttons that a lot of you were making reference on the quiz from Tuesday. But this is going to be his banker uniform. What's the uniform that Gregor has that's in his portrait? It's his old military uniform.
Like how old is he?
We don't get a specific age. I would say he's probably upper 20s, 30s, like around 30. So his time in the military, you're probably somewhere in that like 18 to 21, 18 to 22.
I would like to see like pride.
So sense of pride. And I think if you have those things too, another key word, you have a sense of purpose, where you don't feel lost. Like in that their personality would change.
Like kind of like they get more. It kind of has to do with the pride thing. Like they get more serious about themselves and like what they're doing.
What would be an R word that I think you're kind of going towards? That other people would give them a sense of. I think and I'm not trying to change your answer, but I think more of that there's that meaning, there's that purpose, there's that respect that you're going to get from other folks. There's a larger community group, which can be good. If you're having that struggle for who you are, it could be a mask for it, which some people are going to like and some people might not. But it's a community. There's a bigger picture to things. So when he was in the military, therefore, there was a sense of acceptance that was taking place or purpose by other folks, for sure. So, personal identity, yeah, I think with the uniforms, you certainly could take a look at it as including this. One other thing, since we're talking about uniforms, because it's both Gregor and his father, I would expect that most of you in all of your essays are going to be writing about Gregor, which would make sense. But you can certainly write about other people too. So there could be a paragraph where it's focusing on father. There could be something where it's focusing on Greta or mother or other people. Doesn't mean you have to, but certainly you could take some parts where you're going to be looking at other characters, not just Gregor the whole way throughout. He's certainly the dominant one, but he's not the one that you solely have to look at. So struggle for personal identity. Yeah, I think the uniforms for parts 1, 2, and 3 could certainly work. Rules, expectations. I'm still going to put uniforms down because there's certainly that aspect of society, community that's going on with it. Keep in mind, you might decide you want to tweak the wording of any of these themes and kind of come up with your own thing where, there's a desire to be part of something bigger than yourself. And so maybe the uniforms kind of start to come into there. For Gregor, his military time is in his past. So there was a feeling of community or togetherness, and now that his present does not have that, this is certainly where the uniforms could kind of come in with that sense of isolation. I'm putting part 1 here only because I'm thinking of Gregor's reference to his military uniform, which only happens there within part 1. Part 1. Oh, this one is for the isolation, the alienation part, with the idea that at once he was part of something with the military, and now that that's in his past, it's something that he no longer sees. Right. Tomorrow, vocab list number 7. That'll be the first thing we pick. When I passed out vocab list number 7, I said to you, don't worry about simple, compound, complex sentences. Don't worry about simple, compound, complex sentences. Keep worrying about sentences. Even though it says simple. But if Keith has all good simple, compound, complex sentences. We'll take a look at the rest of the symbols tomorrow. So we got places to put them for our themes, and then that'll put us into a good spot going into Monday of next week.